I'll just say when I'm working on a film, I absolutely love putting music to the image and just seeing the magic that comes out of that, because it's an emotional narrative. It's amazing what music does to an image.
In 1997, during my first major US tour with UK tribal punk rock band Bow Wow Wow, I went to visit a friend of mine at Interscope Records. At that moment in time, Interscope Records was definitely my favorite record label by far. I had had some dealings with them with the band Acacia, who they were interested in signing, but it unfortunately didn't happen. But I did stay friends with most of the people there that I got to know. Anyway, one of the great things at that time was when you went to visit a record label and you had good friends there, they would end up just opening up this big cupboard that had all of their CDs that were available at that time, and maybe some t-shirts, some videos. So when I went to visit during that tour, they opened up the cupboard as usual and just said, take whatever you like, which I did, obviously. But my friend gave me this video cassette with a documentary by a band that he knew I had loved. And the band was 9 Inch Nails, and the documentary was called Closure. And I had 3 months of touring left ahead of me, so any chance I got, I would watch this documentary over and over again. It was just fascinating to me because it was such a well-made documentary that really gave you insight behind sort of the scenes of 9 Inch Nails during their touring and making videos, etc. Cut to 2 years later, I get a phone call from the same friend at Interscope Records saying that 9 Inch Nails was looking for a drummer. Now, 9 Inch Nails were one of my top 3 favorite bands at that time, and I was over the moon to get the call. I made arrangements to fly out to New Orleans to do the audition, and one of the ways I prepared was, first of all, I listened to all the tracks that they'd sent me, and second of all, I watched that documentary over and over again just to put myself in the headspace of the band. But as fate would have it, I didn't get the gig. If you want to hear the full story, just check out episode 2 of this podcast. And that was that. I really tried not to think about it anymore from that point onwards. It was just too depressing, to be honest. But the following year, like I mentioned in episode 2, I moved to Los Angeles, and initially I played with a band called Kidney Thieves, who were also an industrial band. And this is where one of those strange twists of fate happened. It turned out that the female vocalist of the band that I was playing in was dating the director of the 9 Inch Nails documentary that I'd watched for so many years. And that is today's guest, Jonathan Rach. I'm Eshan Kadaru, aka Push for Life, and welcome to the 6th episode of Music, Sounds, and Silence. Before we get into this episode, I would like to share something that happened just a few days ago that deeply saddened me. As of right now, it is the 14th of February 2018, and just a few days ago, I learned of the passing of one of my favorite composers of this generation, Icelandic composer Jóhann Jóhannsson. And I first came in contact with his work, I think probably early last year, 2017, when the movie Arrival came out, and he did the soundtrack for that movie, and that soundtrack just completely blew me away, and I kept listening to it over and over again, and it completely inspired me. That was then followed by his album Orphe, which was his final solo album that also came out last year, and I was lucky enough to go and see him perform that album live in Brussels in the summer of 2017. And that was a really special weekend for me because I took the train to Brussels, I rented a room to stay in at a hotel, and I just went to see the show. Really enjoyed it, stayed at the hotel that night and came back the next day. So it was a full weekend just listening to his music. And when I got back from that show, I was so inspired, and that's when I really started getting back into making my own music again, because his music touched me on such a deep level that it just got me making music again. So anyway, I would just like to pay tribute to Jóhann Jóhannsson. For those of you who don't know his music, I would ask you to go check it out and also hopefully be inspired by it. He was such an amazing composer and a true artist and musician, if there ever was one. And like I said, the soundtrack to the movie Arrival really inspired me, and it was Jóhann Jóhannsson's music that gave that movie the atmosphere that I loved so much. And therefore, I am very excited to share this episode with you with filmmaker Jonathan Rach, in which we talk about how music affects visuals, but so much more. And for those of you who want to dive a little deeper, make sure to go over to the episode page at musicsoundsandsilence.com, because I really put a lot of effort into putting together some really great show notes with links out to documentaries and other web pages that are relevant to what Jonathan talks about in this episode. So without further ado, please welcome filmmaker and good friend of mine, Jonathan Rach. So, Jonathan Rach, welcome to Music, Sounds and Silence.
Thank you for having me.
No problem at all. I'm glad you're on. Listen, just for the audience who are listening, could you just give them sort of context as to what it is you've done in the past and what it is you're up to these days?
Sure. In the past, I've done music documentaries for artists such as Nine Inch Nails, David Bowie, Axl Rose, festivals such as Lollapalooza, the Warped Tour, which is an American festival. I've done one feature, and I've done some film score stuff on that feature. I wrote and directed the feature.
What was the feature called, just so the audience can check it out?
Oh, it was called The Horror of Barnes Folly. It was a comedy horror film, and now I'm, going forward, I'm trying to do features and, documentaries, not just in the music genre, but in other subjects too. So that's kind of the short of it.
Right. So I guess you'd consider yourself a director, a film director, primarily?
Yes, a writer, director.
Would you say you were always an artistic person? Is that something that's always been a part of your life since early childhood?
That's an interesting question. In high school, I didn't hang around anybody that had anything to do with art. To answer that question, I've always felt like I've thought that way, but I've never pursued it early on in school, like high school or anything like that. I know I always was able to make everyone laugh and, just saw things in a funny way. And but no, I never went to art school or anything like that.
When would you say music started entering your life? Was that something that's always been part of your life, or was there any sort of specific moment where your interest for music started?
When I went to college, I was in an apartment upstairs, and there was a door leading to the apartment downstairs.
Right.
And I just, for some reason, I was with a friend, and we were joking around, and we started knocking on the door, and we started talking to the guy downstairs, and we were having this funny conversation. And it turned out that he worked for the local concert promoter, and he said, "Do you want to come and, be a runner for some concerts that the city's putting on and stuff like that?" And yeah, in college, just picked up some extra money, and it ended up being like the biggest concert promoter in Pittsburgh. Next thing I know, I was working on like Def Leppard at the arena,
wow.
Bruce Springsteen. For some reason, after a while, they kind of trusted me with the dressing rooms, and I was like the guy working the dressing rooms and making sure everybody had what. This was while I was still going to college.
Right. So how old were you roughly?
I don't know. Whatever that is. What
is that, like 17, 18, or is it older?
No, I think it was like 20, something like that. Yeah, maybe 19. I'm not sure. 21. So it'd be weird. I'd have my class that I was going to in the day, and then I'd have to figure out my schedule because I had to take like Ozzy Osbourne over to the radio station. And I remember, I was in charge of the Rolling Stones dressing room when they played the stadium. And next thing I know, I'm like, playing pool with Keith Richards and, Pink Floyd when they were in town. And then I was kind of done with it all. And at the time, I just wanted to move to warm weather. And I moved out to Los Angeles and was working in a record store and started to get to know this lady that would come in all the time, and she'd purchase records. It was like a vinyl store, a collector's store, whatever.
Yeah.
And she got to know what I did back east, and she asked me if I wanted to help manage her recording studio. And her recording studio was like this complex that there was no writing on the outside of the building. This is in Los Angeles.
Uh-huh.
And once you entered into this building, that was just basically a cement block building. You had no idea what was going on inside. It was like all these sound stages and recording booths, and Neil Young was in one room, and, you know, Paul McCartney was in another. And, you know, she had heard my background, and I guess obviously I could be trusted around musicians like that. And then I was in that recording studio, and I got to know some of the artists coming in, and eventually started doing stage design. And then I got into documenting their actual tours. And so I was on the road and just kind of didn't have a game plan, but one thing just started leading to another. And that's kind of how all that happened.
Well, so let me just take a step back again to when you were in Pittsburgh working with the concert promoter. Was that like the first time you were around musicians of that caliber? You know what I mean? Like world-class musicians?
Yeah, absolutely.
And how did that affect you? I mean, if you're like a young man, 20 years old, and, you know, I guess up until that point, you didn't have that much to do with music on any kind of professional level, and all of a sudden you're around, I mean, major world-class stars.
Right.
And also, I guess, getting to see them up close when they're not on stage performing, but just sort of seeing how they are as human beings. How did that affect you?
I think it had pluses and minuses. I think the minus was you kind of got lost in it a little bit. It was just so over the top, you know, everything that was happening. It was a big distraction for me at that stage, because I kind of had this idea where I was going to do this other route, which was more about writing and TV and all this stuff. And it was such a powerful orbit that you couldn't help but it was like a little intoxicating. And so on the positive side, it made you realize that there was no limits. Like, you know, you could think beyond just your small town kind of thing.
Right.
It was just, you know, you were watching these people come in, and there was just so much energy around them and all this preparation. And, you know, I'd see fanatic fans somehow figuring out how to get through the vent system. And I mean, it was just people not really acting very soundly, you know?
Right. Yeah.
And these are like, you know, these are really big artists. I remember we did Robert Plant.
Mm-hmm.
And I don't know how this lady figured it out, but she figured out how to get down in. We were at the arena, and she figured out how to get down into the, you know, the corridors down where the, you know, you see those vans and limos come down in there. She figured out how to get down there, and she was just kind of waiting around. And so when he emerged from the dressing room to get into the vans to take him out of there, she came out of nowhere, and she like wrapped her arms around his waist. And she just held on. She put a grip where we couldn't get her loose.
Wow.
And it was like she just locked onto him. And he was just kind of patiently standing there. And we were trying to figure out how to, without hurting her, to make her let go. And, you know, when you witness stuff like that, it's a little off from the music, if you know what I'm saying.
Yeah.
So it was that side of the music that I was seeing where
just people like losing their minds.
Yeah, it was a little much. Yeah, so I think that stuff, I would see that, and I was like, wow, you know, it's like a little bit too far on the worshiping side, but
right.
I saw a lot of really interesting behind the scenes, you know, concert stuff. And then the artists, you know, once you get to know them, they're really down to earth, and, you know, most of them are. Some of them were a little out there, but it was interesting to see people having an occupation as a famous musician.
Like that's a job that you can get paid for and lots of money.
Right.
So then you moved out to Los Angeles, and like you said, you started working in that vinyl store, and then from there moved on to that studio. Well, what kind of stuff were you doing at the studio? Were you doing like similar things where you're sort of helping out artists and making sure that they're taken care of, or what kind of stuff were you getting into there?
Well, there I was just the manager at night. So I'd get in there about 6 o'clock, and the lady would go home, and then I was just kind of there to just oversee the studio. And if they wanted to go till 3 a.m., I'd stay till 3 a.m. kind of thing.
Oh, okay. So you were basically there as long as the artists wanted to be there.
Right.
And how long did you do that for?
Actually, for a very short period of time, I think it was only like 4 months or 3 months. And then I started to get to know some of the musicians, and that's when I started to get into the creative aspect of stage design. And
how exactly did that happen? Could you just sort of elaborate on what happened that, that people started asking you to do that, from managing a studio to stage design? How does that happen?
So when I was working for the concert promoter, I'd always make sure that when the show would happen, I would go out and I'd watch at least some of the show.
Yeah.
And I'd always observe the stage and the design of the stage and the lighting and all that. And I was always intrigued, and I felt kind of privileged to see so many concerts and so many stage designs. And I would kind of just, for my own hobby, I would kind of critique them, and I thought which ones were cool and which ones weren't.
Which ones stood out to you at that time?
I remember there was a small little club show that a band called Psychic TV came in.
Mm-hmm.
And very clever. They didn't have a lot of money, but they just projected onto the stage all these images, which is pretty common now, and it's nothing new. But I remember back then.
What was that, like early 90s or something?
Yeah, it was like somewhere in there, like 89, maybe 90.
Right.
They, I can't remember exactly, but they just seemed to do a lot for little, and I thought that was pretty cool. And then, of course, on the opposite end of that, just watching Pink Floyd and all that they do, trying to think, for the most part, I'll be honest, I found it monotonous. Everybody seemed to do everything the same way. I remember when David Bowie came in, he seemed to kind of approach it differently. But this is going to sound odd because nobody does this anymore, or at least it's back then, all that people did was put the drum in the middle,
yeah,
the keyboards on one side, and then there was the par cans across the top. And sorry, not to get technical, but just the drum was always in the middle. Anyway, so fast forward to, I'm hanging out in the recording studio, and I started to get to know some of the artists, and we were all getting along personality-wise, making each other laugh and having a good time hanging out in the kitchen. It's a very intimate thing for those guys to be in there recording, and so you're kind of in their inner sanctuary, and you become kind of part of the hang.
Yeah.
I just remember I was bored, and I just drew a whole stage design, and I kind of gave it to at that time, my friend who got to know him in the studio, Trent Reznor, and he liked the sketch, and he liked that it was different, and I didn't have the drum in the middle. I had the middle of the stage area was completely empty, so that you get depth of field. The lighting could be worked more differently, not having a drum right there, and then it was not industrial looking at all. And I guess people had been submitting nothing but industrial designs to him.
Right.
Whatever the case may be, they chose my drawing. And then through that process, Trent and I started to realize we were like on the same page creatively and talking and all that. And I guess he thought, why don't you come out and document the tour? And then that's how that all started. And that was the first tour I went out and documented on.
Wow. So, I mean, you just say that in like one sentence, and I think that's like one of the key moments in your creative career so far, because I think at the time, was that around the Downward Spiral album?
It was the Downward Spiral.
Was Trent recording Downward Spiral when you were in that studio?
Yeah, they were just finishing it up. He was actually still doing some things with it, and but for the most part, they were getting ready for the tour.
All right. So was the album was released at that point when you were submitting the stage designs, or was it still like pre-release and no one really knew what was going to happen? Because I think when the Downward Spiral was released, that was kind of like, that took Nine Inch Nails to a whole different universe, really.
No, the album was not released yet.
Okay, so maybe I think a lot of the people who might even be listening to this, because I mean, I was a huge fan of Nine Inch Nails, so I kind of know the history behind it all and how it kind of blew up. I think a lot of people might not even realize how big Nine Inch Nails kind of became at that point in their trajectory. And I guess you were just right on that cusp of them exploding, and then you were asked to document the ride, basically, right?
Well, yeah, the interesting way to look at it is, as sort of a voyeuristic way, is to imagine me. I've been around the concert industry, but I obviously was never on tour. And so that tour started out at a club level, and it grew from club to theater to arena. And then we had some big shows like Woodstock and some big giant festivals overseas and up in Canada and stuff like that. So I really got to ride that rise of like going from clubs to arenas. It was it was, what a thing to experience, and that's what I was there for. I was to experience it all, and with the camera in my hand. And many years later, I was having a conversation with Trent, and I was like, hey man, again, thanks for letting me live like a rock star for all these years, and quite an experience.
I think from then onwards, I mean, you still were around a lot of really huge artists, like David Bowie and Axl Rose and a whole bunch of other people. I mean, that must have surely colored how you approach your own art of film direction and writing and all that kind of thing. Because, I mean, the arts, they do interrelate. I mean, just constantly being around so many amazing artists surely left a mark, even maybe just in creative process or, seeing how people cope with different situations. Is there any takeaways you had from working with such major stars? I
actually find a lot of inspiration from it because I don't have a film background, so I don't, like, a lot of my kind of go-to philosophies have to do kind of with like the same way you're writing a song or music, just because I was around it and witnessed it and experienced the effects of it at that level.
Yeah.
Symbolically, when I'm creating something in the film world, a lot of times I'm thinking in kind of the language of in the music world.
Oh, that's interesting.
And I think they're interchangeable, obviously, at that purest level of artistic expression. But one thing I wanted to say is, just to back up for a second, when I was working at the record store, that also was a very interesting experience. So it was this giant vinyl store in like 1990, 91, whatever it was. Maybe it was a little later. I'm not getting my years right, but I know that vinyl was going out and CDs were coming in.
Mm-hmm.
So I was in this just very bizarre intersection of music where people were coming in and just selling and dumping their vinyl because they were switching their collection from vinyl to CDs.
Right.
This is in Los Angeles, but in places like Germany and Japan and England and Australia, people weren't ready to give up their vinyl. So what this little record store was doing, and it wasn't very little, it was like the size of like half a basketball court.
Wow. Okay.
Just rows and rows of vinyl. We were buying everyone's vinyl from, in Los Angeles community. They were just dumping all their vinyl, and then we would clean it up and we were, selling it to people that were selling it overseas. And
oh, okay.
And then all these CDs were coming in. That was another very interesting aspect to witness of the music industry.
Yeah.
But the coolest part was, and this is what I would say to whether you're a musician or not, go into one of these really big vinyl stores and go and like check out the different categories of music. The record store that I worked in, we weren't allowed to play rock ever. It forced you to kind of listen to all these obscure genres and artists and things like that. And it's all this like vinyl that nobody wanted. And so you really found all these eclectic artists, and that was really cool. Yeah, and in being in Los Angeles, it was like also another really cool thing would happen I remember I was at the front counter, like checking someone out, they're buying vinyl, and these two kids run up to this guy and they're like, "Can we have your autograph? Can we have your autograph?" And the guy's like, "Yeah, sure, no problem." He signed something, and the kids leave, and I'm like, "Oh, cool. Who are you?"
Yeah.
And he's like, "Oh, I'm Dr. Dre." And here, when he did the Chronic,
yeah,
he did it close by, and they would come into the record store and they would listen to all this old like Blue Note and Motown.
Yeah.
So he was like recording his record, and he would come into our store and like pick up all this old vinyl, and it influenced, I think it would influenced his record.
One thing I'd like to touch back on that you mentioned when you were working with all of these artists, you mentioned how it was all about the creative expression and seeing these artists express themselves so purely, I guess. One of my big questions and mysteries, I think, as an artist myself, is why human beings have such a need to express themselves. You know what I mean? Because we express ourselves in so many different ways, and it's something that is pretty much important to every human being I've ever met, be it from, how you dress, your hairstyle, to the car you drive or whatever. It's all a form of expression. And but I've never really gotten to the bottom of why we have such a desire to express who we are. And do you have any thoughts on that?
I think there's some sort of connectability. You're connecting with yourself, like you're getting to know yourself, maybe. For one thing, it's an emotional connection. Yeah, I guess it's maybe a way of kind of validating who you are to yourself, maybe. Because I think in its purest form, it's not really about anything other than the relationship you're having with the art. So I don't look at it as like, you're trying to like be accepted or you're trying to impress somebody. I look at it more like you're connecting with something about yourself, like an emotional psychic of yourself or something. I think that might be at the core. And then if somebody relates to that, yeah. Wow, what a connection, and it's hard to explain. I don't think you can explain it. Like I noticed just recently, there was a little video clip that I saw on Instagram, and it completely inspired me, and I can't explain why. There was just something emotionally about it, and it was like the coolest thing I'd seen, and I could watch that over and over. I don't know, other than it just makes you feel good and helps you maybe process something or.
Yeah. It's like I said, it's still a mystery to me to this day, and I express myself artistically in some form every day. But that motivation, it's always intrigued me why humanity as a whole seems to have it. You know what I mean? I
think that's like the freer side of us. I think not to get too heavy or layered or whatever, but
yeah,
I feel like hopefully as society keeps evolving, that it becomes more about the arts and people's individual expressions and less about 9 to 5, if you know what I mean.
Yeah.
I mean, think of how many great artists there are that just never got into a position or an opportunity to really express themselves in a way that you would even get to hear about it or experience it.
Especially pre-internet, right?
Yeah. I mean, full circle, why would that girl wait around and then run and grab Robert Plant around the waist and not let go?
Yeah.
Obviously it's to you and I, it's a very disturbing behavior, but what is it that he produced that she found such a strong connectability in it that she, I don't know. It's interesting to think about if that's what you were asking.
Yeah. No, it is. Absolutely.
I'll just say when I'm working on a film,
yeah,
I absolutely love putting music to the image and just seeing the magic that comes out of that, because it's an emotional narrative. It's amazing what music does to an image.
Yeah, that's actually something I really wanted to talk to you in more depth about. So please go ahead and really go deep on this one, because I think that's something that's really, really interesting to see how music and visuals have like a synergy where it's like 1 + 1 = 3, if you know what I mean. It's like they're right. Both more than the sum of their parts, and it'd be really interesting to hear your perspective on why that is and how each affects each other.
Yeah, and again, it's one of those things you can't really explain it. I mean, that's pretty descriptive, like 1 + 1 = 3. That's kind of true. You have this cool image, and then you try different music on it, and each time you put something different, it changes the whole meaning of that image. And then one will just pop. One will just be like, that's it. And of course, if that's inside of a bigger story, it has to kind of fit with the story. But
sure,
there's something very powerful about the music and what it does to a visual that kind of completes the picture.
So say for instance, sorry for interrupting you, but say for instance, if you're out shooting images, right? Do you have music in your head that you're like, I'm sort of like hearing this in my head? Or do you really literally go out, have an image of what it is you want to shoot, and then take it back and then just start laying stuff on it? How does that process work?
Yeah, you can do it where there's no music in mind, there's nothing in mind. And then there's the exact opposite. You might be listening to music while you're filming something. And I think they equally have their own outcome. And there's no right or wrong, as I'm sure you know. Again, talking about the power of music, I know sometimes when I try to write while music's playing, it's too powerful. It kind of pulls it all towards the music.
Right.
A lot of times I'd rather write with no music playing, and then it's not influenced so heavily by the music. Or maybe you want it to be very influenced by a certain piece of music, so you're playing that vibe so that your writing is reflecting that music. And
so it kind of puts you in the zone, you mean? Like that type of zone that you want to get into?
yeah. You know, it's really funny. One time I went into a restaurant that's near a movie theater in Los Angeles. It's actually connected to the movie theater. And in the restaurant, because it's part of the movie theater, they actually play film score. And I was trying to write, and I couldn't write. It was like, it was driving me crazy hearing film score while I was trying to write. I can't explain it. It just like, it really had an effect. As opposed to just hearing like a song, like a popular song or some song just playing. Source music is what they call that. Film score was like, it was just too much. And so I thought that was interesting.
Yeah, I actually have the same thing the other way around sometimes, because the type of music that I like to write is pretty abstract a lot of the times anyway. So what I'll do, I have tons of books that I've collected over the years by photographers that have different themes. Sometimes I'll just see an image, and the image is so powerful that I can literally hear the music to the image, if you know what I mean. Just like you might hear a piece of music and then be like, I know exactly what kind of visuals would fit this, So it works vice versa, which is also kind of interesting because it wouldn't have to be that way.
It's very powerful. When you watch a film that's really resonating on an emotional level, the music is very important. As far as the overall expression goes, it's equal parts to the acting, the writing, the cinematography. And a lot of times it's subtle, but it's powerful,
I think a lot of times people don't even realize how much the music is influencing how they are perceiving the visuals, because a lot of times, like, there's a certain movie that I like and I'm like, oh, I want to buy the soundtrack. I'll hear music and I'll be like, I never consciously heard this music whilst I was watching the movie. I was listening to Lord of the Rings, I think, 3 or 4 months ago, and I was like, the music was so dark. It was like scaring me. It was that crazy, like probably some orc scene or something. And I've watched the movie multiple times, and I've never heard that music consciously. But it's amazing how much the music will color what it is you're watching. And I think you'll realize it most if someone was to take the music away, and then you just sort of like watch blank visuals. There's no movement. I think the music helps create some sort of movement and tension and release that just otherwise can't be done just with pure visuals. It's almost like the emotional side of the visual, the music, you know what I mean?
Yeah, I mean, it also goes to what you asked me before, what is it that we're so driven to express ourselves? I think it moves us, right? Think of when you watch a movie and it makes your eyes water up, right?
Yeah.
Is there something, you're alive, like you are alive, you're awake.
Yeah.
You're not being dumbed down by some indifferent part of society that's just there to make $1 and pay your bills or whatever. I mean, if we all could, we would just be wanting to feel moved all the time.
Yeah.
I mean, you just feel alive.
I think also great art really pulls you into the moment, into the present, which is kind of what it is, just the other side of the coin of what you're saying of feeling alive. I think when you're really very, very present, then you feel alive, right? Mm-hmm. If you create art and it comes from a really deep, authentic place, obviously you have to be extremely present in order to do that, right? You can't just sort of like be like, I'm just going to do anything. And you have to be so super present. Like, I guess when you're out making a movie, you're hypersensitive to everything that's going on around you, like camera angles and lighting. And so you're super present, right? And if you do it correctly, that then translates to when you show those visuals to someone else, there's a almost magical quality to something that's born out of pure authentic presence, if you know what I mean. And I'm just thinking of this now as I speak. I think that might be what ends up touching people, is if art is born in an authentic, deep, personal space, and then you somehow manage to capture that, be it via visuals or music or whatever, or painting, and then someone sees that, then that also draws them into that present moment that it was created in also. You know what I mean?
Right.
And I think that's something that ends up connecting and transferring a certain energy and a resonance of what the artist produced and what it ends up producing in the audience. You know what I mean? There's some sort of connection there that it's invisible, but it's there. You know what I mean?
And then I also think there's another aspect of which this could be a downside for some. Obviously some people take music more serious than others. Some people, it's just something in the background. Others, they make it the focus of their life.
Yeah.
I think that for the ones that make it in the background, the thing that I think that comes in and gets in the way a little bit is popularity. So there's a connectability that they're listening to something that's really popular.
Right.
And so, and that has a reward. There's definitely a reward in that. But it's so that's the opposite. It's about like what everyone else is kind of experiencing and has very little to do with what's going on inside you.
Right. It's more of an external tribal thing, I guess.
Right. So again, this thing is just multi-dimensional. We could talk about it's rewarding when you're, like you said, you're introspectively looking at yourself, or you're just kind of like seeing what a whole culture is doing, Right. They both have their rewards and they both have their lore. But yeah, I would think like hopefully that somebody that doesn't take music that serious to just really try and go in deep on something that just relates to you. It might not be popular. It might have nothing to do with anything. It might be uncool.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? It's like I was listening to soft 80s love songs while I was out with Guns N' Roses. You know what I mean? Like just something opposite of what was going on. And, just because I liked it. And it was, I liked the feeling and the vibe it was giving me. And yeah, I think there's a weird dynamics in anything artistic. You want something different, but you want some sort of familiarity. So right. That's the dynamics that I think exist in it. You don't want to have the same story told to you, but you want to have familiarity with the story. Like I remember somebody was telling me, and it made a lot of sense, like you want a certain structure to a song,
yeah,
but you don't want to hear the same song.
Right.
So you figure that out, you know? So people want to hear a chorus, they want to hear a bridge, they want to hear you know what I mean? Like, but they're different.
The other thing I wanted to ask you, are there any like particular movies, just from your own personal standpoint, that really stand out where the music and the visuals just like blow you away, where you don't even think about it anymore? They just sort of engross you so much that where the director and the producers and everyone got it right. What movies come to mind where you're just like, oh, people have to see this,
I was blown away by Pink Floyd The Wall. That just blew my mind when I saw that. I couldn't believe that they had intertwined so well music and visuals, and it was non-chronological. It was almost like an art piece and it was abstract enough that you could kind of put your own meaning into it. I thought that was really good. I was really impressed with that. There was this movie that I think it was called Smoke.
Is that with Harvey Keitel?
Yeah. The ending to that movie blew my mind. And it goes exactly into our conversation because they just stopped using words in the end and they just played a song.
Right.
And the visuals unfolded to the music. And like we talked about that 1 + 1 = 3.
Yeah.
It was so magical and there was no dialogue. And basically, I think something where Harvey Keitel's character was going to go and steal from a blind lady.
Yeah. And
when he gets there, she thinks it's, it makes me emotional just to think about it. She thinks that it's her grandson visiting, and he doesn't have the heart to go through with what he wanted to do. And so he sat there with her and listened to her as she talked, and she was so happy that her grandson came to visit. And here he was there to rob her. It's hard to explain. You have to really just see it. But it's a very powerful ending with a very powerful use of music. That's what I recall. And it has to do with storytelling. Like the characters are actually talking about story. And it was amazing that the moment came to actually tell the story, there was not one word. It was all music. And so it was very powerful.
I guess that also speaks to what we were saying earlier about how the music really transmits a lot of the emotional side of the visual. I guess it communicates so much without words.
I can't imagine not having music in your life.
Now, actually, now that you said that, one of the things I wanted to ask you, was there ever a period in your life where music really wasn't present?
Yeah, I think it's always been there. I remember, this is absolutely silly. It's kind of funny to think back when you're a little kid and you're listening to music. And I remember listening to the Beatles. This is going to sound, I'm not saying this is that far back that it was the Beatles. I was listening to the Beatles, which was an old band at that time.
Yeah.
And I just remember my older brothers, and you know, everywhere you hear the Beatles are the greatest band ever and all that. So I'm like hearing this as a little kid, and I'm listening to the Beatles, and I'm like with no knowledge whatsoever of anything, just a little kid listening to the Beatles. And I remember thinking to myself, there's no more songs.
Right.
Like there's no more songs to write. They wrote them all. Like there's no more creativity, you know, like such a silly thought, you know. But yeah, I mean, you know, to kind of say the reverse of what you asked me.
Yeah.
I, you know, recently went through a hard time with something, and I literally started listening to the Beatles. I don't know why I chose the Beatles, and I was just listening to them and listening to them. And it kind of felt like it saved me. Hearing these expressions of emotions and all this and that, it brought me back to life again.
Actually, especially with that example, the thing I love about it is most of those musicians are dead. At least half the band is dead, you know, and the other two won't be around for much longer. But to think how, you know, like you just said, in a, you know, a rough patch in your life, that the music still has such an effect that it can practically save your psyche, at least, you know what I mean? That's amazing to think that we live in a time where, as artists, things get documented way beyond our lifetimes, and you know, you really don't know who you're going to affect with your art. I think that's something that's really like a major shift, even if you just think about even a few hundred years ago, where classical musicians were creating amazing orchestral stuff. They were still writing it all down and hoping that people would interpret it properly. You know what I mean? But you got to listen to the Beatles in their heyday, going straight from the headphones into your ears, into your brain, into your heart. You know, that's pretty deep if you stop and think about that.
Yeah. And then now look at people have access to any music that they can think of.
Yeah.
And there's so much music out there. It's crazy. I can't believe how many artists there are now.
I know. It's really kind of overwhelming. It's like I have like a streaming service where, you know, I have access to everything. And because I have access to everything, there's so many times I'm just so overwhelmed these days that I just go for the stuff that I know I like, because I'm like, I really don't know where to start. There's just so many old things that I want to check out, so many new things that I have no idea what they are. I'm like thinking, should I listen to them? By the time I've gone through that whole process, I'm like, oh, let me just put on, you know, whatever album that I know I like. I just want some music on, you know, that kind of does nice things in my brain, if you know what I mean.
Yeah, and you know what might be interesting is, you know, back in the day when you would go to school and you'd take art class, that, you know, the teacher, we've all drawn and painted in art class, right?
Yeah.
It's like part of the curriculum. I imagine in Europe that's the same thing,
absolutely.
right? You know, it's 101 art class is you paint something, you sculpt something, you do that, but it's not 101 that you write a song. So maybe in the future, everybody will have an expression of writing a song as part of the curriculum. Like it feels almost that way. Like, you know, there was only a few people that did it, and then they were put on pedestals and they seem larger than life, and now everybody does it. On one level, that's kind of cool that it's a very normal human expression to write music. And so, you know, maybe if there's some people listening out there and they thought, well, you know, I'm not a musician. Well, you don't have to be a musician to write a song. You could, you know, hook up with somebody that knows how to record it and do this and that. You can write the lyrics. You can kind of express to somebody what the tempo is, what songs inspire you. Like, it's almost like, you know, you go to art class and they make you do different forms of expression.
Right.
I think it's cool that somebody that's not a musician decides that they want to write one song just for the heck of it.
I mean, it sounds like most major pop artists these days, what you just described. I'm going to go get someone to make me a beat. I'm going to get someone to choreograph a dance. And
right.
You know what I mean?
Yeah. And maybe that's offensive to some musicians, but at the same time, you can, you know, I did one song with some friends, and, you know, and I was lucky because they were very famous musicians and very successful.
Yeah. And
they were kind of at my fingertips, and they were like, we were joking around in the studio, and I was like, okay, I want to do this, I want to do that, and we put it together, and I have a song, and it's cool, and people listen to it.
Well, I absolutely think everyone has the right to express themselves however they want, and no one has the right to tell anyone they are something or they aren't. Because I mean, I teach music, you know, I teach drumming, I teach music production, and so many times people will come to me and be like, you know, oh God, I'm terrible, and they just put themselves down. But
Right.
You know, everyone has the right to start somewhere. And who am I to tell you, you have the right to call yourself a musician or a painter or whatever?
Right.
It really is down to how you perceive yourself. And if you feel like you're artistically expressing something, even if it's noise, there's noise artists, you know what I mean? There are people who just create noise or abstract, free, improvisational stuff that sounds like noise. But, you know, it's like with all art. If you say it's art and you can sort of somehow explain what your intention was, who's anyone to tell you you're not being an artist? You know what I mean? Like,
there's no rules, right? You're absolutely right. And I'll tell you another cool flip to that is to have a song written about you, which I've had that happen, and that's really cool. Think about the gift you're going to give someone if you decide to write a song about them. If you're writing a song about your girlfriend and you write the song no matter how innocent it is and how unprofessional.
I think that would actually even add to the charm, really. How many times in a movie have we seen someone with an acoustic guitar singing terribly and playing terribly, but he gets the girl? Well,
and that's the other thing is, like, you really, if you're going to try and write a song, you should really make first that it's entertaining you. Because if you're trying to mimic or copy someone and you're off the mark, it's like, you know, nails on a chalkboard.
Yeah.
But if you just decide to make it all about your own entertainment and the subject matter is somebody in your life, then it shouldn't miss the mark too much if you enjoy it, right?
And I think also, as with all art, the process is a big part of the art. You know what I mean? The making of the art, like kind of what you were talking about earlier, where it can be something, you know, therapeutic. Like a lot of times I'll make music that no one has ever heard, but it's kind of healed me on a certain level, so I don't really care if it gets heard, because for me, the process was the important part of it, not people listening to it and telling me if they like it or not. I really couldn't care, because in that moment, it kind of helped me heal a wound, for instance.
Yeah, that's amazing. Maybe that's kind of a cool thing to get out of this particular podcast is if there's somebody out there that thinks that they can't write a song, find a musician friend that knows how to write the song and collaborate and just see what you come up with. And if you're writing it about somebody in your life, like, what a cool thing to do.
If you think about it, there are even like really famous producers who kind of work like you just said. And the one who comes to mind is Rick Rubin. Rick Rubin is famous for really not knowing anything about the technology when it comes to production. You know, he has his sound engineers who are amazing, but he has the vision. And then he'll create a team of people around him who will help him and the artists that he's working with realize that vision. But at the end of the day, it's all happening in his head, and he's delegating what has to be done.
It's very interesting what you just said. My experience from being in the music world and in the film world is, at the core, the gift that a person has is what I call sensibility.
Right. And what do you mean by that?
You know, like you said, somebody like a Rick Rubin is not technically educated, so he doesn't know. I'm guessing.
I think he prides himself on it, actually. I think, if I remember correctly.
So he's just going purely on his, you know, what he's feeling.
Yeah,
and he's intuitively just kind of thinking and feeling things and making decisions. And as a director, you're making all these decisions constantly. Just that's literally what you're doing. You're like an intersection of decisions, like, should I cast this? Should the actor do this? Should this go there? Should that music go over that scene? Should I take that scene out? Should this go this way? That it's like, you know, like an artist painting. Every brushstroke is going to change the expression. And what sensibility are they tapping into that's making them do what they're doing? And I don't think you can be taught that. Same thing with an artist that can sing. Like, some artists just have whatever it takes to be able to sing, and some don't, you know. And I find that the Rick Rubins of the world that just are going purely on their intuitiveness or their sensibility to the subject is really what's at the core. The guy that knows his way all around the recording studio, he has to have that too. Not saying that if you know the technical end inside and out, you don't have the sensibility. I'm not saying that.
Yeah.
I'm saying that if they're going to be both great, they both have that sensibility. And somebody like a Rick Rubin might be just stripped down of all the technical stuff. He doesn't have it, but they both have the sensibility. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
That's what I noticed being around some really powerful musicians, is that they have a sensibility about things.
To round things off, the question that I always try to get at towards the end of the podcast is, I mean, we've been speaking about music all of this time, But at the end of the day, music is something that is super abstract. And myself being a musician, I know this firsthand. It's like I create music all the time. I listen to music all the time. A lot of times I'm just sitting there thinking, what exactly is music and what defines something as music? It's obviously all sound, but not all sound is music, right?
Right.
And as this podcast is called Music, Sounds and Silence, silence also plays a very important role in music. You know, the spaces in between the notes that, you know,
Yep.
bring things to life. So I'd just love to hear your perspective on how you feel that music, sound, and silence, how they interrelate. And hopefully, if you can somehow just describe what takes something being a sound and makes it into music. It's just completely subjectively your opinion, because I don't think there is a right or wrong answer.
I mean, I would think that what makes something music as opposed to just sounds is there's some sort of pattern to it, right?
Right, yeah.
You know, what is it in our psyche that when we hear rhythms or when we hear certain, you know, notes, that it creates an emotional, something emotionally comes out of you.
Right.
Some connectability. I don't know if you could ever put that in the words, or I don't even know if you'd even want to try. You know, you'd probably destroy the whole moment trying to figure it out. You know what I mean? But I do notice one thing I thought was kind of interesting, and this might be too much on the technical end, but two things I'll say that I found really interesting. I got invited to a hockey game once.
Okay.
And it was a Pittsburgh Penguins hockey game. It was the first hockey game I ever went to. And Mario Lemieux was on the team, right?
I don't know who that is, but...
So if you know hockey, Wayne Gretzky and Mario Lemieux dominated forever.
Okay.
Kind of like the same way Michael Jordan dominated basketball.
Right.
And I have no knowledge of hockey whatsoever. I've never experienced it. I've never been to a game. I don't know anything about anything. I sit down, I'm watching, and I notice one guy is completely standing out from all the other guys, and it's Mario Lemieux.
Okay.
And I turned to my friend and I said, "Look at how effortless everything he's doing." And she goes, "Oh yeah, he's incredible." And I was like, it's almost like he's dancing out there. He's like, you know, it's not when he's hitting the puck, it's everything in between.
Right.
And so there's a kind of something that's like hard to explain about the way he was moving that just flowed. He was in some zone that I can't explain. And that's where music is at its greatest too, is like when you listen to somebody like Neil Young, he'll say, "I wrote two of my most successful and powerful songs in one night when I had the flu and I woke up at midnight and I couldn't sleep and I grabbed my guitar and these songs just came out of me. I can't explain it. I wrote them like effortlessly." Most artists will say that there's that zone that they can't explain where it just flows.
Yeah, I guess the technical term is actually like a flow state. You know, there's like the whole movement of science behind flow states. And that's what people a lot of time will call being in the zone.
But here's the interesting thing.
Yeah.
I've been around some very successful musicians and I'm not a musician, so I won't mention names because there was a critique going on.
Okay.
And so I'm standing with this, you know, just absolutely world-renowned guitar player, known around the world as being like one of the greatest guitar players.
Right.
And we're watching a guitar player on stage. He turned to me and he goes, "You know what's wrong with that guy up there? He's thinking about what he's playing."
Right.
Once you start over analyzing it, you've destroyed the moments. It's one of those things you can't really think about it or else it's gone. Maybe that's the magic of music, is you're really not supposed to think about it too intensely. You're just supposed to let it take over you. You know what I mean? Like you're not analyzing it. You're letting it just kind of hit you and do what it's going to do. And
I can totally relate to that. And I think a lot of musicians who are listening to this will relate, because so many times when I've been on stage, or even if I'm rehearsing with someone and we're just jamming, it's happened to me on numerous occasions where I'll be playing something and I'm literally in that zone. I'm in a flow state. And then the musician next to me will literally stop me and be like, "Oh my God, what did you just do? That was amazing."
right.
And it's almost like when you wake up from a dream and someone says, "What did you just dream about?" And you're like, oh, and it's gone. And on numerous occasions, I just do not know what I did. And there's no way I can recreate it because I can't even remember it because I was so in the moment. And I think that actually goes with everything, not even just the arts, but I mean, if you ask like a basketball team, like Michael Jordan, for instance, in his heyday, when he was playing, I'm sure it was the exact same state he was in. He was in a flow state, and you know, he dribbled down the court and someone said, "Can you repeat that?" You can't, right? Because it just happened, and it, just as quickly as it came, it goes.
Yeah, and that's the magic of it. I mean, that's what I think is to kind of go full circle. Like when you put the music to an image, a visual, and it just creates something different. That's magical. It's like you can't explain it, you know. I think we're all better off when we're being moved emotionally through music and arts. Sometimes, unfortunately, it seems like the people running society are all about commerce and money. Everything you're doing is to pay bills, and everything I got you doing is to make me money, and which is part of society. It's part of it all. But really, the balance has to be there where you're just getting in touch with nothing to do with any of that, just being emotionally moved and touched and expressing yourself and listening to other people express themselves. And
yeah, I think actually, like touching on what you just said, I think at the end of the day, it's all about being productive and efficient in society is to allow those spaces that you can listen to the arts or participate in the arts, that it gives you those moments in your life where you don't have to worry about, okay, you know, how am I going to get food? Do I have to go out and kill a deer or something? Society has set up these systems that as long as, you know, if you put, they're all means to an end, or they should be. And I think what you're saying is as well is that, you know, those means to an end, the priorities have shifted, that it's almost like it's not about being able to have free time to follow your bliss. It's just about making money for the corporations at the end of the day, you know? Yeah,
unfortunately, our country seems to be really going off the rails at the moment.
I think that's definitely a topic for another podcast. But listen, man, thank you so much for taking the time to do this. It was a very, very inspiring conversation. Are there any artists that you're currently listening to that you just like to share with your audience that inspire you right now? Any new music?
Let me think about that. I just discovered a song. It's by Mickey Blanco, and it's called Wish You Would, featuring Princess Nokia.
Okay. I've never heard of any of that, but
yeah,
I'll definitely check it out.
It's just, I don't know much about it other than somebody had posted something on their Instagram, and I was like, wow, that's pretty cutting edge and pretty cool.
Well, listen, man, I also just want to say this publicly through the podcast. You've been someone who's massively inspired me over the years. A lot of like what I do these days is colored by just, for people who don't know, I used to work with Jonathan editing film and stuff, and there's just so many things that I learned from you, and I just wanted to thank you from the bottom of my heart. I wouldn't be where I am creatively right now without, you know, your help. So thank you for that.
Oh, thanks, Ish. That means I feel the same way about you, brother. I really do.
Thank you. So how can people connect with you online if they want to sort of check out any of the things that you've done?
Through Facebook.
Facebook? Cool.
Yep.
Well, thank you, Jonathan Rach, and I'll speak to you soon. Thanks so much.
Okay, thanks, Ish. Talk to you later. Bye.
And that's it. Thank you so much for listening. Thank you, Jonathan Rach, again for coming on the show. In the next episode, I will be having Cirque du Soleil vocalist Tara Baswani on, which I'm very excited about. Make sure to subscribe on iTunes. Also, make sure to check out the show notes page over at musicsoundsandsilence.com. I have been your host, Eshan Kadaru, aka Push for Life, and I look forward to seeing you next time. All the best for now. Peace.